Welcome to Global Citizen Life podcast. Today on the show, we have Thomas Murray. And Thomas, welcome and thank you very much for joining us.
Ali, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So, you are living in Malaysia, and it's actually a place that I want to visit next year and check it out as a potential move. I haven't spent much time over there. Why did you choose Malaysia? How did that happen?
It's a good question. So my background is I work in finance, and there's a company in Malaysia which was doing extremely well in all of Asia, and they gave me a job offer, and it just seemed extremely exciting to me. So I head over there in February. At the start of this year, I was over there. I was there for about 10 months. I'm currently back in the UK visiting for a month, catch up with family again, and then I'll be heading back out. But long answer to the short question, which was just a nice job offer.
Excellent. And had you been there before the job offer? Or did you spend some time there at all?
No, it was a bit of a wild stab in the dark, actually. I had lived in Japan for a while and I'd lived in Thailand for a little bit as well. So I did have some Asian experience. And Malaysia to me seemed like it was a good base in Asia that was also a bit more westernized because obviously everyone
Mhm.
spoke English there and you have a lot more of the creature comforts. And it definitely was that. So it was a good shot in the dark.
Nice, nice. And no offense, better weather than the UK.
It's not hard. I've yet to live somewhere that has worse weather than the UK. We are number one on that one.
Yeah, I'm more sunshine and warm weather, so that's definitely a good thing. So obviously, weather aside, as we now know, it's great. What kind of what have been, let's say, some, let's start with challenges. What have been some of the challenges of living there, moving there, and working there?
Of course. So I'd say the first challenge is the admin side of things. If you want to go and live in Malaysia, you're going to need to get a visa of some kind. If you're an expat over there, there's only a couple of Asian countries which you don't need a visa to go and stay there. Any Westerners, you definitely will. And the admin process is long, it is arduous, it will take months. And it will seem quite backwards as well. There'll be lots of loopholes that you'll have to jump through, which won't make any logical sense. And they'll take months to turn it around as well. So I would definitely start planning well in advance and look at the visas that you need to go there. Once you manage to get through all the red tape and you actually do get
Mhm.
to live there, then the issues with living there, I would say, are not too serious. Again, a lot of the bureaucracy and red tape, like setting up bank accounts and all of that, is quite backwards. But overall, it is a place with a lot of the Western creature comforts. So you get the nice weather, although there is on average like 3 or 4 thunderstorms a week because it's quite hectic in the middle of the jungle there. But
Mhm.
yeah, you can get all of your food delivered super cheap. Everyone speaks English, so living there, I would say, is probably the biggest draw for most people. It's definitely nice. With working there, so for me, I was obviously working in finance, and Malaysia has quite unique laws when it comes to finance. There's no tax on foreign sourced income, which obviously attracts a lot of expats who've got overseas businesses. And there's currently
Mhm.
no capital gains tax as well. So it makes it quite an attractive tax haven there. But then, of course, you've got to make sure not to put your foot in anything along the way. So I guess for me, it was just learning the rules of Asia. But once you've got that under your belt, then yeah, I'd say it's a great place to live.
Many things to consider, and definitely that's probably why they have some of the hoops for you to jump through to make it a little bit harder to deter some people. But once you get there and you get all set up, there's definitely several advantages of living there.
100%. And you'll find the same with neighboring countries as well. Like Thailand has a pretty unique dual tax treaty with the US, for example, which means that your pension wouldn't be liable for income tax in the US, your 401ks. They would only be liable for tax in Thailand. And then in Thailand, you only pay tax on the money that you actually remit into the country, which creates this loophole, right? Which even the US can take advantage of and pay minimal tax. So yeah, learning those kind of things, you can see why they have to make it a little bit difficult just so everyone isn't going and getting the pensions out tax free.
Right, right. And so also then the average cost of living, like now so you were there for a while and back visiting in the UK, so you can really notice those price differences on things in the grocery store and kind of those day-to-day items. Talk a little bit about those price differences.
It's really funny you say that because I haven't stopped whinging about it for the last 2 weeks. Yeah, I'm back visiting family at the moment, and yeah, they must think I'm just a miserable, tight old man because the prices of everything is killing me. So I guess some good examples of cost of living. In Asia, you have something called Grab, which is sort of the Asian equivalent of Uber Eats. And
Mm.
you can get a Nando's delivered to your house for the equivalent of £3, so about $4. I landed back in London and we went to Nando's, and the same meal cost me £17. So probably around 22, 23 US dollars. The the price of alcohol as well. In London, it was 10 British pounds for a pint, about 12 US dollars, and over in Asia, you're looking between £3 or £4, about 4 to 5 US dollars. So there is a stark cost of living difference. Accommodation as well. In Asia, the accommodation is really cheap, and in Malaysia, you can get really nice apartments for I would probably say half the price of what you get them here in the UK, and maybe a third or even a quarter of the price of what you get them at in London. I know in the US, you're not quite as bad with property as we are in the UK, so it might not be as much of a difference for you guys. But yeah, it doesn't make me happy to be back in old Blighty, that's for sure.
I have that struggle too. Spending some time in the US. But I split my time generally between Spain and Montenegro in Europe. And when I come back to North America to visit, like I spent the other day, I went out and I had a glass of wine. One glass of wine was 30 US dollars
That's in North America.
in Nashville, Tennessee.
Good Lord.
And it wasn't a one-off because a little before that, about a month or so before that, because I've been here for a while, I went to a different restaurant. It was a nice restaurant, and I had two glasses of wine. What was it? 9 ounce glasses of wine. And then by the time tax, tip, and everything, two glasses of wine cost me $60. Almost
That's
died. I'm
crazy.
like, do you know how much food and stuff I can buy in Spain or Montenegro? Like I can eat for a week off of this
Yeah,
two glasses of wine.
literally you could live off that for a week in Malaysia, no problem at all. That's crazy. And it kind of ruins the experience, right? When it's that expensive. Like you're looking at it thinking, God, what am I doing? And I was like that in London. I spent 2 days there and I was out having dinner with friends. And I was literally spending my month's grocery bill on one dinner. And oh my God, get me out.
Yeah, I mean it's just crazy and I mean and every place is busy and people are out and I'm like, do they realize how expensive this is here compared to so many other places? Now, granted, some people here, especially here in Nashville, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money in this area. And maybe for them it's no big deal, or they're just so used to it that they just don't realize that the cost of living here is so high compared to so many other places.
Do you notice the effect of inflation more traveling around?
I do.
Yeah,
I do notice it a lot.
it's a big thing, right? Because when you're living in a country, it's that old story of, if you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump straight out. If you put it in warm water and slowly warm it up, it'll sit in there until it boils to death. Now,
Hmm.
if you're in the country and you're just watching your price increase incrementally, maybe your grocery bill is increasing a little bit month on month, you don't notice. But if you spend a year out of the country, I've come back and it's eye opening because you've got an entire year's difference, and inflation is supposed to be back down, under 5% globally at the moment. But I'm sure, the cost of groceries is still soaring a lot higher than that.
I think so too. And I know sometimes, at least I've heard what they'll do within North America when they say, oh, the cost of things is up or down. They don't always compare. Like before, in that kind of basket of food items, when they
Mm,
compare the cost, they took out the steak and they put in ground beef. I'm like, well, of course, and then it's, oh, it's
yeah.
down. It's like, no, you're trading out the food. You got to compare the same apple to the same apple, the same cut of steak to the same cut of steak, the same, because otherwise they kind of play with and fudge the numbers that way. But yeah, it's ridiculous how much people pay for some things in North America. I mean, I get it though. I mean, they're here, but for those people who are, wanting to leave because of the cost of living, there are several places to go to and check out and see. It's not just the cost. Obviously, the weather is part of it, the lifestyle within itself. Um, and another thing, how far you are from home. I mean, from Malaysia to the UK, that's not just a quick flight to get back home.
It's not, no, if it all goes smoothly, it's about 17 hours and it never goes smoothly. So yeah, it's definitely a longer term commitment if you're going to go and live in Asia, if you're moving from the US or the UK. So we were just talking about the time difference there. And when I was in Malaysia, I had some US clients and they were 12 hours behind. So trying to set scheduled times, it was always first thing in the morning or last thing at night. And obviously, if you've got family, then that can make things difficult as well, right? So it's definitely a big consideration is the time zones and the distance.
Yeah, that is a big one. Even I have a place in Montenegro, and to get from Montenegro, even back from here in Nashville, I've looked at a few different flights, and it's the one that I took, it's a bit weird. It's 22 and a half hours to get back, but this one is three flights, where there was another one that was four flights, but it was about 18 hours. So the layover time was a little bit different.
Mm,
But then I thought that's four flights on and off, on and off, on and off. Like I'd rather just do more and hang out in an airport a little bit longer, get some work done, walk around. But yeah, it's a thing that needs to be considered of if you need to fly back home, how often do you plan on going? You know, if it's once a year, it's manageable, it's fine. But if you've got clients and things or aging parents or just things that are going to bring you back more often, that location really needs to be considered and near to airports. Like, do you have to
100%.
drive for 2 hours to get to the airport and then start the journey?
Yeah, my inconsiderate mother very rudely decided to live 6 hours from an airport. So when I just finished my, I think it was 29 hours, including all the delays that I had to get back from Malaysia. It's then 6 hours on a train to get the end of it. So definitely proximity to airports. And yeah, there are places if you're from the US, then there are lots of sort of islands, maybe a bit south of you as well, that you could live on for better cost of living, but also not be too far from home. And in
Mhm.
Europe, obviously from the UK, you've got so much of Europe on your doorstep, and Montenegro is a lovely option as well.
It is, and you know, there's pros and cons to everywhere, right? And everybody's I say their list of pros and cons will vary. What might be a negative for myself personally may not be for someone else. So it is important to make a list of everything you kind of want. Like I always say, people make the dream list, everything you want, write it all down, and then from there, go through it and say, okay, what's important? And then even out of those, one more time to narrow it down, what are the non-negotiables that truly will make the difference? What do you need to have? And then from there, it's becomes easier then to eliminate places. Like for me, one of the things is I don't like winter. I don't want to be in the cold. I don't want to be in snow. I can go visit that type of weather if I want. I don't want to live in it. So any place that has cold winters and snow, I just cross them off the list. Like great way to narrow it down initially if people are unsure where they want to go.
Definitely. And as you say, they're independent to everyone else, right? Like at this stage in my career, I'm very financially driven. So for me, the first thing on the list would be the taxes and the earning
Mm.
potential in each country. And then it would probably be the weather. But I don't know if you can tell in this lighting, but I'm actually a natural ginger. So it can't be too sunny for health and safety reasons. So that's why the clouds in Malaysia were actually a good thing for me as well.
Yeah, yeah. Finances is really important too, I think, because I mean, if we're gonna work, we're working the same amount of, let's say, hours, the same hardness, the same input that we're doing. I don't want to be giving more of my money away to the government. And so
Exactly.
that's a consideration. And then, as you mentioned earlier with Thailand, that double taxation to make sure where people are going, that there's a tax treaty in place. What type of business do you do? How are you getting paid as well? Because for people who are freelancers or self-employed, I've had people say, "Well, I just get paid with Stripe," and I'm like, "That's great, but." Stripe doesn't work with every bank around the world. Like there's certain countries, Stripe doesn't work in Montenegro. They're
Yeah.
not working with any bank. So that's another thing to take into consideration if people are self-employed as to how they're getting paid, and so how are they going to access those funds.
Of course, that's huge. And also, you mentioned about dual tax treaties. As US persons, you're always going to have reporting rights to the IRS, no matter where you live in the world. So if you live somewhere without a dual tax treaty, you're likely going to end up paying the same tax twice. And that would be once in the US and once in the country that you're living. So it's kind of a necessity for US persons. You should only live somewhere where there is a dual tax treaty in place. Otherwise, it's just not worth getting out of bed for work in the morning.
Right. That or they don't have any taxes. If
Yeah,
they're like the Cayman Islands or something, Dubai perhaps. But you're very limited, and you're really limited on the number of countries. It works for some, but doesn't the US though, don't they have like over 100 countries where they have tax treaties? Like
that's right. Yeah. So
there's a
over
lot.
half of the countries in the world they have dual tax treaties with, and most of them are the more common tourist destinations or
Hmm.
expat destinations. So it would be pretty niche to find a US person that wants to go and live in one that they don't have a dual tax treaty with. And I would say that would likely only happen if they had family there or something like that that was dictating it.
Right, right. But there's it definitely is a concern because it's just very different for US citizens than almost any other country. There's only one other country in Africa, and I'm pulling a blank on the name, that is taxation by citizenship, but it's a small country in Africa. Um, where with us from Canada, once we exit properly, we make sure we've done everything to exit, then we just file and pay. And the same with you in the UK, file and pay within the country that we're now the resident of.
Exactly. For us, tax residency is mostly decided by actual residency, and that would be wherever you spend more than 180 days and 182 days of the tax year. But yeah, the US, you citizens there get pretty stuck. And also, as a US expat, there are other restrictions as well. For example, if you are a US person living outside of the US, you shouldn't invest in any foreign mutual funds. They're classified as what's called PFICs, which is passive foreign investment companies. And then the IRS will tax you 40% on any income generated through that. So let's say you grow your portfolio by 10%, immediately 40% of that, so 4% is going to go to the IRS. And the problem with
Wow.
that is a lot of expat advisors that just deal with everyone don't understand that about US citizens, will invest them in it. And that was quite a common thing that I came across, was meeting US persons who've been invested in things which they then get destroyed by the IRS for. So definitely if you're a US person, make sure you get a US qualified advisor, even if you're an expat.
Yeah, it's really important. It's a completely different set of rules, and so they would want to, take that money, invest in other things, and not have to give the government 40%.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
often they don't realize, right, until they file the tax return at the end of the year, and even the IRS actually can miss it. So I did have one client where the IRS missed it for 2 years, and then it was only in the third year that they saw it, and then wanted to backdate the tax for the entire 3 years. And I met this client at that point, and he just couldn't believe the size of the tax bill that he was facing, like six figures. But once you're at that point, then yeah, so definitely seek advice from a US qualified person before you get started.
Yeah, yeah, that's very, very important advice. And so lifestyle wise, compared to the UK to Malaysia, I mean, it's obviously because of the weather, it's quite different as well. But like, how do you and most people who live there spend time off, long weekends, holidays, things like that, compared to what you would have done living in the UK?
Yes, great question. So the biggest thing is the temperature. So in the UK, it's pretty much cold for 350 days of the year. And in Malaysia, it's hot for 365 of them. So most activities there do involve air conditioning. It would be inside cinemas. They've got so many malls in Kuala Lumpur. They're absolutely overflowing with them, and there aren't that many outdoor activities because it is just so warm and humid all the time. So I think that's one thing. If you're outside of Kuala Lumpur, then you're closer to beaches. If you are around those sort of areas, then yes, you might be spending more time at the beach or at the sea. But KL is quite an intense city. So you definitely more inside things, I would say, is the big difference. There's a lot of wining and dining, and the expat community in Kuala Lumpur is actually quite tight knit. Once you get there as an expat, you do very quickly meet lots of other expats, and then there are lots of dinners, expat events, and stuff like that as well. But again, almost entirely inside, apart from a few jungle hikes as well.
Okay, so I mean, I guess in a way, then it's similar because the UK it's cold. People are doing stuff inside because it's cold, and there it's just the opposite. People are doing stuff inside because it's hot.
Yes, in the UK, it's not cold enough that you can't go out. It's kind of we're not cold enough that you can get nice snow and have some fun with the snow, and we're not warm enough that you can go outside with your shirt off. We're in this horrible in between where you can go outside and just get rained on and have to put 3 layers on. So yeah, you do get a bit more outdoor activity in the UK, I'd say.
Okay, great. And travel from Malaysia to neighboring countries and area is quite easy because it's fairly close. So I guess that's kind of similar to the UK getting into Europe and traveling around is simpler with in Malaysia going to like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Singapore.
You're spot on. Yeah, Kuala Lumpur is an air hub, and you can get across to Thailand for the equivalent of around $15 for if you get the right weekend. Singapore, you can get there for less than 10 if you get the right weekend. And yeah, you're a stone's throw away from all of the Asian countries as well. So it's a really good base to then branch out and visit some more. I think I flew to Cambodia. It was about 2 hours, and I'm pretty sure it cost me less than $40 to get there and back. So you can definitely get around and see more of Asia, basing yourself there.
And that's just, I mean, that's just another thing that brings that cost of living down is because
Mm.
anywhere within North America to travel, like the US does have a one or two, I think, kind of low budget airline carriers, and they can travel fairly inexpensive occasionally within the United States. But if you want to get anywhere outside or even anywhere outside of Canada, it's very expensive. And when I tell people that I get angry if I have to spend $100 on a flight, return flight in Europe, like I'm upset about it because there's so many times where if I book just a little bit in advance, and sometimes just a week in advance, it's not even far, but that the cost of flights and transportation is so inexpensive compared to North America.
It is. It's so cheap. And yeah, North America, you guys are quite expensive. I've flown intra-American before, and yeah, it's very expensive compared to Europe, and even Europe is expensive compared to Asia. So yeah, definitely getting over that part of the world, you'll be astounded how cheap it is. It'll cost you less to fly from one country to another than it would cost you a full tank of gas to drive for a few hours on the road. So that's definitely one of the big perks.
Yeah, yeah. I've told some people some stories about even being in Barcelona. I was like, oh, next month, why don't we just, go to Rome for dinner? Because it just sounds so like, oh, I went
Mm.
to Rome for dinner. But if you plan a little bit ahead, it doesn't cost much. You get a
Yeah,
seat sale, you go first thing in the morning, you're back in the evening, and it might cost you $150, but it's like, yeah, I went to Rome for the day and spent the day there, had dinner, came home and slept in my own bed.
exactly. And in the UK, with the cost of living here rising so much recently, you can actually fly away and have cheaper weekends away than you can here. As I say, I spent 2 nights in London when I first got here, and I've had a full week's holiday in Europe for the amount of money that I spent in 2 days in London. And it's not uncommon to have people now that are working in London, but they live in Europe and just commute in by plane, because again, it is not that expensive, and compared to the cost of renting apartments in London, it actually makes a bit of financial sense to do that for them.
I remember I was in London, and this was several years ago. And I do house and pet sitting because I love pets and travel, and so I'll go to a destination and take care of somebody's cat or dog while they're on vacation, and I get to hang out. And I had one in London, and it ended, and I had another one, but I had 4 days in between time. And I just went on to Google flights and I was like, where's the cheapest place I could go? Let me see. I might stay, maybe I'll go somewhere. And it turned out it was cheaper for me to go to Belfast for 4 days, fly there, pay for an Airbnb, did some stuff obviously while I was there for 4 days, and fly back was cheaper than for me to stay in London.
Yeah, that honestly doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah.
It's horrendous. London is its own sub-economy within the
Mhm.
UK. So I mentioned a pint of beer was around £10, $12 in London. I'm now down in Cornwall where it's half the price. So just by traveling 6 hours by car, literally the cost of living is halved. So
Wow.
yeah, London is it's its own kettle of fish these days.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's why, a lot of people are leaving and looking for other destinations to get to that are more enjoyable, whichever that may be. Some people like cold weather, they like snow, some people like the warmer weather. Definitely that cost of living. What about healthcare in Malaysia? What's that like? What if you've experienced or if you've talked to people who've had to deal with the healthcare system?
I have, yes. So for my clients, I deal with their healthcare insurance and things like that as well. So it's not expensive compared to the US. I would say maybe a quarter of the price on average for the actual services, and that in turn makes the insurance a lot cheaper. So yeah, in Malaysia, you don't get any free healthcare. You do need insurance. So for expats from the UK, that can be a bit of a shock to the system, right? Because in the UK, we do have an NHS that's doing its best to take care of us, although it is very much overwhelmed and has been for the last decade or so. But yes, over there, you will find decent levels of medical service, especially for Asian standards. Malaysia is definitely one of the better ones. And the cost of it is quite a bit cheaper as well.
Okay. Are they known for any type of medical tourism? Because I think I'm not sure which medical tourism is just becoming bigger, and there's different countries that are kind of known for things like, for example, Turkey is known for
Yeah,
hair
teeth and
implants.
hair.
Like
Yeah.
people, and that's fine. I mean, it's what people want to do, and that's the place to go to for that. Is there anywhere either in Malaysia or Asia that's really known for a specific or certain procedure? Do you know?
I I'm not saying there isn't. I just haven't heard of it myself. But yes, I've definitely heard of turkey teeth and the old turkey haircut as well. But
Yeah.
I haven't actually heard of anything in Asia. It wouldn't surprise me if that starts being a thing though, because it definitely is cheaper compared to Europe, and the standards are constantly improving. They're really developing quickly.
Yeah, and a lot of doctors and nurses and staff and things get a lot of training in North America and Europe. I know, what was it? I think India for like heart surgery or something like that is starting to become really popular. And so it's it's looking for alternatives because it's expensive, and that's when you can, obviously, if an emergency comes up and people can't get places. But healthcare is an important consideration for people when moving. And I mean, we just never know, right? We can be super healthy and sometimes things happen, and so it is important to have a place where we live that has good healthcare.
100%. And it is a stereotype of the Asian parents that force their child to be good at math and grow up to be a doctor. But there is genuinely truth in it because a doctor is held in extremely high regard in Asia. It's really that profession is put on a pedestal. So they do produce a lot more doctors per capita than a country like the UK, for example. And so the UK actually imports a lot of doctors from India and from Asia as well. So yeah, it really doesn't surprise me that they are also really elevating their own healthcare standards.
Hmm. Yeah, it's and as more people are coming and more people are immigrating, those are the things that they're looking for and to bring people on. So it's kind of a win on both sides.
100%. And there's definitely a shift in wealth towards Asia at the moment. I can't remember exactly which countries that I saw, but there was a graph showing which countries are expected to gain millionaires versus lose them over the next year. And the UK is going to be a pretty big loser on that front
Hmm.
because we not only is our cost of living getting higher, and not only did we vote to leave the EU, which has turned out to be a complete disaster. I'm not sure if I can swear on your podcast, so I'll go with the safe one there. They're also bringing in some really big tax reforms, and they're going to be punishing the high net worth individuals. So I have a couple of contacts myself that are looking to leave the UK in the next year, and I think we're expected to lose over 10,000 of our millionaires next year. Um, and I
It's a
don't blame
lot.
them. It is a lot. It is a lot, and the wealth leaving the country, it's not going to be good for the country, and they've got to be going somewhere, right? So a lot of them are going to be looking to Asia, where, for example, in Malaysia, they could go and live there and pay no tax on the gains on their wealth. When in the UK, they're going to be been paying 45%. So it's going to make a huge difference. Yeah, it's not great moves on the UK's front, but I guess that's why we're expats as well, right?
That's right. That's right. We see what's coming and what they're doing and make moves to counter it. And as you said, it's a benefit for Malaysia or whatever other countries. I mean, even to just look at Dubai. Look at how many people, and not everybody lives there full time, but how many millionaires are in Dubai living there and have moved their business there for tax purposes. Somewhat lifestyle too, although it does get quite hot. Dubai is not for everybody, so they are looking at other places. And I mean, I wouldn't want to just give away 45% because the government's changing some rules, or even 20%. If I can live a comfortable lifestyle, enjoy the things that make me happy, why would I stay in a place that I'm having to pay for more for? And I always say to people, it's like, what is your return on investment? And with that, and I mean that with taxes too. If you're paying for taxes, what are you getting in return? Are you just you're in a place that you love and you're okay with it, and they're maintaining roads good and schools, and I get there needs to be a certain amount of taxes to pay for some things. But then when you're over and above that and the cost of living is higher and going up and you're paying more, it's like, well, what am I getting back for this? Sometimes when people look at some places in Europe and they think, oh, well, I'm paying more in taxes. And then I say, but you're not paying for healthcare and you're getting better healthcare. So sometimes then they're still, when they look at the overall, their monthly expenses is less, even though a few things they might be paying a bit more for. But then again, it's that return. What am I getting in back? If I'm paying out all these things for housing and food and taxes and everything else, what do I get in return for it? And if I'm not seeing for me what is a good return on investment, then it makes no sense to live there. And for all of those people, that return is diminishing a lot. They're not getting anything more for paying more.
100%. The juice has to be worth the squeeze, so they say, and you have to take all of it into account, the cost of living, the tax you're paying versus saving. But then there are obviously a lot more human factors that cause people to stay in one place. I think for
Of
people
course.
like you and me, we find joy in moving and seeing new places. And I can tell by the fact that you want to fly to Rome for dinner that travel is, it's a part of you that
It's
you
a
enjoy.
priority.
Yeah, for a lot of people though, it's not. And I have friends say to me like, you know, do you not just want to stay at home, put up roots, have the creature comforts? And for some people, I guess that is worth more than 45% tax, but just not me personally.
Not me personally. And I get it, and I understand too with people and family with a lot, it gets hard to leave family and things. But I mean there's ways too that we don't have to always leave for 100% of the time. Like depending upon where you're going and the rules you have, you can live in a country and save on taxes and be there 7 months out of the year.
Exactly.
And you can spend the other time traveling and being in different places. So I think a bit of a common misconception is people think, well, if I'm moving and I'm going to save taxes, like I have to be there all the time. But in most cases, it's that 83 days plus, what like whatever on the plus side. And then a few other things to consider. Obviously, if you have property there, you're renting and things to really say, no, this is where I live, I'm residency status, and all of those things. You can still travel for several months out of the year and spend a lot of time. And I often ask people too with family and for some I say it's like you live here, your family lives within the city or within a certain amount of time, how often are you physically spending time with your family per
Mm.
week or per month? And then if you kind of add that up, it's like, well, if you moved abroad, you could still video call and chat and message, but then when you come to visit, then you spend more time together. Like when I visit my family in Canada, they like to watch TV. So we watch a lot of TV. So it's like I'm not really visiting. When they come see me in Costa Rica, there's no TV. So it's we are together. We are doing things, going to the beach, having dinner, barbecuing. We're really spending more quality time in that 1, 2, or 3 weeks while they're visiting, as opposed to I go to their place, I'm there, we're watching TV, we kind of talk a little bit, but it's not really that quality time.
100%. And there are some cases where that can be so extreme as well. Less so again for the US, but for example, the UK, if you're earning £100,000 a year and you're paying 40% of that away in tax, it means you're netting £60,000 and your cost of living is going to be half of that. So you're going to be spending 30,000. So at the end of the year, you might have saved 30K. You then go and live in Malaysia, for example, that 100K you're then paying half the tax on, which then leaves you with 80K. And then your cost of living is going to be halved again. So at the end of the year, you're left with 65, which is more than double what you would have in the UK. That
Mm.
35K can then be used to have the most incredible holidays and times together that you choose and have much better periods. And as you say, you don't need to be there 100% of the time. In order to be tax resident in a place like Malaysia, you just need to be there for 183 days of the tax year. And then the other 6 months of the year, you can spend wherever you want. So that's definitely something that some people do. And my two friends that I mentioned that are leaving the UK as their high net worth individuals, they're not going to be leaving permanently, but they're just going to be moving their tax residency to another country by spending more than half the year in Portugal, because Portugal is
Okay.
bringing back a very favorable tax regime, and then they can still spend half of their time in London with their friends and family as well.
And it's easy for their friends and family to come visit them in Portugal because it's very close.
It is, yeah. It's just the flights in Europe at the moment. So I came back from Portugal yesterday, actually. So
Okay.
I flew from London to Portugal and then back here. I didn't fancy the 6 hour train, but ended up spending God knows how long on delayed flights because Lisbon
Mm.
Airport at the moment is absolutely overrun due to how popular it's becoming as a tourist destination and expats. So they're going to have to do some serious renovations on their infrastructure and their airports to cope with the amount of people that are moving there. And Portugal was one of the biggest winners on that graph that I told you about, which showed,
Mhm.
the gainers versus losers of millionaires. Portugal is going to be attracting a lot of them next year, and it's going to become a very wealthy country.
That's a bit of a double-edged sword, I think, because with more people moving, I mean, the infrastructure is going to take time, right? They're not going to have new, bigger, and better airports within a year. It's going to take that time, and then the cost of living for some is going to increase as more people are coming in with more money. But yeah, it's going to provide more jobs as well. So it's always kind of just trying to find that for the country that balancing act. But it's been just like nonstop growth in an upward direction with expats when they had that the golden visa of buying property, which there's been all changes, kinds of changes with that. Um, but it's been increasing with that and tourists. I mean, so many people love Portugal.
They do. And on the geopolitical stage, countries have got to be careful not to piss other countries off. And we were talking about Dubai earlier. They
Mhm.
were 0% tax on corporations. They've now had to impose a 9% tax on corporations because they were going to be threatened by getting grey listed, which would then impose financial restrictions on them. Portugal actually got threatened with the same thing by a couple of countries, and I believe it's Denmark have imposed their own sort of sanctions against Portuguese tax and their citizens moving over there to try and take advantage of the tax benefits. So Portugal actually abolished its non-habitual residency regime, which allowed foreigners to move there and pay 0% tax on their foreign sourced income. And they had to revise it, but they're actually bringing it back pretty much with the same fundamentals, just a couple of caveats to do it. So I think they
Right.
took it away for a year and they're like, know what? No, we're going to stick by our guns and they're bringing it back, which a lot of very rich people are very happy about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always say to people, like, with the government, it's tough, and it's just play by their rules. And that's the thing is they don't want us to know what a lot of the rules are because they want to keep people working, paying taxes, don't ask questions, do what you're told kind of thing. But once you start to do a bit of research and you find out what's allowed, what can be done, because before when I was living in Canada, I used to think I'm Canadian. Of course, my company has to be in Canada. Of course, I pay tax in Canada. Of course, my bank accounts need to be in Canada. I'm Canadian. And I didn't realize it until, well, part of it was I got an audit one year and I was like, okay, I know that governments do random audits. It happens. And it was for rental property that I had in Costa Rica. And so basically they said, we're going to accept all of the income that you claimed, that you stated. We'll believe that any of the deductions that you claimed were not allowing any of them. And they were receipts that I was given from my property management company in Costa Rica. And then they said, so we've redone your taxes and now you owe us X amount. And because it was from 3 years ago, even though we're only doing it now, you owe us late fees and a bunch of other things. And that's when I started. I like thought, like, this is crap. Like everything was legit. I was like, whatever, I'm getting audited. Here's everything. I don't really care. And then that's when I just thought, okay, I hear stories about all these massive companies who do all these things. I'm going to learn the rules. I'm going to
Mhm.
start to learn these rules and figure out what I can do, what I'm allowed to do. And that was the really kind of early start um, of of my new kind of life and journey. And then moving abroad, then I started to realize more with residencies and citizenships and all kinds of stuff, and realizing that countries just want to keep us trapped in there. And that's why, as you said, they try to punish other countries for when people realize things can be better and often are in another country.
Exactly. That is a really common misconception that you said, I am from X place, therefore my company must be in X place and I must pay X tax. As a Brit, I can set up a company in Estonia and pay 0% tax on any of the funds that are then paid out that year. So what that means is I could set up a company, I could then use it to do business there, and as long as I pay the funds out to myself at the end of the year, it would pay 0% tax. It would just be liable for tax where I was, where therefore if it was Malaysia, for example, there would be 0% tax. For the record, disclaimer, not a tax advisor, and these are 2024 rules and regulations, which may have changed by the time you're listening. Um, Talk to a tax
Yeah,
advisor,
of course.
and be aware that you can make a lot of changes. You can position yourself in the world to be in a much better tax position than you are just sticking in one country. And as you say, there are countries which are just trying to tax the living life out of you, and the UK has turned to that. They're in quite a lot of global debt, and they're trying to turn to the taxpayers to recoup that debt, but they're going too hard and scaring them away. There are other countries out there, like Portugal, like Malaysia, who aren't trying to do that. They're trying to attract wealth. Both of them are doing their own things that they need to do to manage their countries for their own reasons. But if you are free enough to be a global citizen and choose where you want to live, there are definitely some countries that are a lot more favorable than others. And you hear stories, as you say, of companies that set up offshore corporations and so on, and they might do it illegally and fall foul of the tax man and end up paying punitive taxes. But there are lots of legal ways to do it as well. You can
Mm.
play exactly by the book and minimize the tax that you pay if you are free to move around the world.
Yeah, everything, it's all about setting it up the right way and doing it legal. And we tell people, you can reduce your taxes to zero or even low single digits if it's set up the right way. And you want to do it the right way. Like I would never want to be like, oh, I hope I don't get caught. Oh, who's calling? Oh, checking the mail. Am I getting a letter in the mail of, anything? And I said to people, if you want to do something illegal, just don't pay your taxes then that's tax evasion, that's illegal, and eventually you'll get caught and go to jail. But why? When you can do it legally and have it structured properly, and there are no worries, and you're saving yourself thousands and thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, hundreds, depending upon millions, depending upon how much you make.
Exactly. Not declaring the taxes correctly or breaking any of the rules, honestly. And I have clients that are tempted, that they say, "Oh, what if I just don't declare it?" And it's just not worth it. it
It's not.
it's not. You should always make sure that you're playing by the rules, because the law always wins, so they say.
Mm.
So yeah, there are enough leeways that you can take to be well off yourself without breaking the rules.
Yeah, yeah, there's so many options available. There's absolutely no need for it. So Thomas, just as kind of a last piece of advice or something for people who are listening and they're, kind of interested of reducing their taxes, moving abroad, what would be kind of the first few steps that do you think that they should take to make sure they start the process the right way?
Of course, if you haven't moved abroad, I would recommend with speaking to a financial advisor in the locations that you're thinking of moving to. So, for example, if you're in the US, a US advisor isn't going to know much about the tax regulations overseas. But typically, if you find an expat advisor living in the country you're going to, they are going to understand both, because they deal with expats in those countries. And obviously, I might be biased, but I think I could be a good candidate for that if anyone's listening that is looking for some advice if they're moving out to Asia or Europe. Um, Look at it as soon as you can and have that as a factor into your decisions. And as I say, there are lots of potholes that you can fall into, as well as advantages you can take advantage of. So definitely, as soon as you can have the conversations, do it and be guided before you get over there, because in a lot of situations it can be too late.
Absolutely. And so if people wanted to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to find you?
I'd say LinkedIn. I'll drop you across the link to my LinkedIn as well, if you're happy to pop it in the description. And anyone who
Sure.
is an expat currently or looking to expatriate and live overseas, happy to have a free consultation with anyone to talk through their situation. And if I can help, I'd be happy to.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we get that added to the show notes. And I just want to say thank you, Thomas, very much for your time.
Sally, it's been really enjoyable. And thank you so much. And enjoy the good weather wherever it is you're hopping around at the moment.